CRX episode number 3. Today I'm going to show you how to take your engine bay from this to this. I'm going to show you how you can get professional level results out of a spray can in your garage without any specialty tools at all. So let's dive in. Anybody that's ever spray painted anything knows that the finish that you get out of a spray can is often different than the finish that you see from the factory on your vehicle. But that's because most of the paints that people are using are just generic spray paints that are not designed to actually be for an automotive application. Did you know that it's actually possible to purchase aerosol can paints that have original automotive grade paint inside of them? Using quality paints is how you're going to get an OEM type finish out of a rattle can on your engine bay. Today we're going to be painting the engine bay on the CRX Polar White, which is a factory Honda color. To paint the bay, we're going to start by removing everything that's not going to get painted. We're going to sand everything that needs to be painted. We're going to prime all of the surfaces. We're going to put down a base coat, and then we're going to spray a 2K or 2-part clear coat on top of everything for a really glossy finish that's also going to last over time. The clear coat is an important part of making sure that the engine bay stays looking nice for a long period of time because it resists chemicals and scratches from working on the engine bay or spilling stuff on it that's unexpected. While purchasing high quality automotive paints in an aerosol is much more expensive than purchasing generic rattle can paint in aerosol cans, it's definitely worth it. It's also probably cheaper than you would expect. All of this paint combined is less than $300 total. You guys saw in the last episode, I removed almost everything out of the engine bay and pressure washed the entire engine bay to get it ready for this day. Most of the hard work is done, but the last things that I need to do are remove the struts and mask off everything on the back of the firewall. I need to go in and sand all of these deep scratches on the frame rail. Same thing on the other side. And then one last bolt check just to make sure that I got everything off that I don't want to get paint on. One important thing to consider before you start masking your car for paint is make sure that the car is in a location that is easy for you to paint. What I mean by that is if your car is too low to the ground, it's going to be difficult for you to paint the bottom areas. And if the car is too high off the ground, it's going to be difficult for you to paint the top areas. So make sure that you jack up your car, put it on jack stands or have it on a lift and get it at a height that is going to be comfortable for you to rattle can every single part of the engine bay that you do want to repaint. As I start sanding the engine bay, I'm going to use 150 grit for all of the areas that need extensive roughing. Those are the big chipped areas. And then after the rough sanding is done, I'm going to go back over the engine bay with a 400 before it gets primered. I figured while I was in here, I would address the big hammered area for the alternator. I just put a little bit of body filler over it and smoothed it out so it wouldn't look so terrible after paint. While the first coat of filler was drying, I decided to start masking off all of the loose things that were hanging out in the engine bay. This includes all of the brake lines, the speedometer cable, and just sort of the miscellaneous that were poking through the firewall that I couldn't remove or chose not to remove before painting. After I'm happy with all of the sanding and all of the repair bodywork that I did on that alternator area, then the whole engine bay gets blown off so that I can begin prepping it for primer. Now that I've got everything masked off, the major bodywork that I was going to do is already done and all the rough sanding is finished. Now it's time to go back with some Scotch-Brite and just rough up any surfaces that didn't actually get any of the sandpaper. This will also take off any of those little high spots that are left from the sanding itself. After I've Scotch-Brited pretty much the entire surface, then I'm going to go back with a clean rag and wipe everything off, do a final blow before we do our first coat of primer. For the Scotch-Brite, I usually cut off a small square, which makes it easier to get into those tight corners. I'm just going to go over all of the top surfaces and pretty much everything that I can reach and make sure that I have a nice, even, roughed up surface throughout the entire engine bay so that the primer goes on smoothly. Now just a final wipe down to get all those last little bits of dust off of all of our main surfaces. So take your time to get all the little nooks and crannies and get as much of the dust and dirt off as you can before we lay down our mat on the floor and begin primering. One thing that's often overlooked is the hood hinges. I like to paint these while they're on the car. I simply use a little bit of welding wire and tape it to the windshield before the masking goes on. This allows me to paint the top side and the bottom side of the hinge. With the engine bay ready for paint and the drop cloth put on the ground, I'm going to put on a little paint suit And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a filler primer on all the areas that had all the heavy sanding and the bodywork done first. I'm going to focus on those areas. I might lightly mist some of the other areas as well with the filler. I'm going to let that filler dry, and then I'm going to go back and spray the entire engine bay with the regular primer. Primer is very forgiving when you lay it down, so don't stress on this too much. Just make sure that you keep the can moving so that you don't get any heavy areas or runs. With the filler primer sprayed, I'm going to let that dry for about 20 minutes before I put the actual primer on the entire engine bay. For the standard primer, I'm just interested in making sure that I get good coverage around all of the areas that are going to get paint. The entire bay is going to get a nice even coat. All right, that's all I'm going to do for primer. Those are the 2 coats of primer. I'm going to let this sit for about 30 minutes before I come back in and give it a wipe down, and then I'm going to start shooting the base coat. Here's a look at the primer laid down. Don't worry about this being super evenly distributed around the engine bay. Just make sure that everything that's going to get painted has some primer on it. Now that the primer's down and it's time to put the first base coat, one thing to keep note of is that you should have sort of a strategy on laying down the base coat. The reason is that the primer is very forgiving if while you're spraying you kind of bump it or touch it accidentally, but the base coat is not. It'll definitely smear if you touch it. So typically my plan of action is to find all of the crevices and difficult areas to paint, the ones that I'm going to have to kind of reach over other painted areas to get to, and do all of those areas first. So for me, I'm going to start on the underside of the frame rails, the backs of the strut towers, and then behind the headlights. From there, I'm going to move on to the strut towers, the fender wells, and the front headlight bucket areas. Putting down the base coat is much more critical than putting down the primer. These should be nice, even strokes from about 6 to 8 inches away from the metal. Take your time as you're doing this and make sure that you get good, even coating over all of the areas that you're trying to paint. Because the base coat does dry slower than the primer, you can sort of take your time with this. Don't feel bad about moving around to different areas and then coming back to areas that you've already gotten if you see that there's a spot that you didn't quite fully get. All right, so base coat is on. The 3 cans was just barely enough to cover the entire engine bay. So if you're doing a Honda engine bay like this, I'd recommend 4 cans for the base coat. I thought that because this was a little smaller than a Corolla engine bay, I could get away with 3, but I think 4 is the deal. 4 is the ticket for coating a Honda-ish engine bay, this size of a front-wheel drive bay. So unlike the primer, I'm gonna let this dry for even a little bit longer, maybe 35 to 40 minutes before I start putting clear on it. It is pretty warm and dry here right now, so it is going to tack up pretty quickly. So let me show you some close-ups of what it looks like with the base coat on, because it is not that impressive until you put the clear. I want you to see the difference between putting the base coat without the clear and with the clear. It's a huge difference. So with the base coat down, it almost looks like a primer. It's kind of a matte finish. It doesn't look like it's super well covered. It almost looks a little gray in some areas. But I assure you, we're fully covered in this polar white paint right now. I tried to emphasize the heavier coats in the areas that are most prevalent, the ones that are going to really stand out in the engine bay, like the strut towers and around the engine mounts, around the top of the cowl. All of those areas, the side of this frame rail especially, is really visible when the engine is in the car. So those are the areas that I was focusing heavily on, getting as much base coat as I could. All of the nooks and crannies, I just sort of dusted multiple times until they were coated, but I didn't focus on them too much because most of them you are not going to really be able to see it that well once the engine's back in the car. Clear coat's going to go on the same way as the base coat. I'm going to start with all the hard to reach areas, the stuff that I know I'm going to sort of be reaching over already painted areas with, so I don't want to bump those areas if they have fresh clear on them. So same as last time, let's put the clear. I forgot to mention the clear is actually a 2-part. It has a hardener in it. So actually in the cap, there's a device that you push into the bottom that breaks the seal of the hardener. Then you shake up the paint so that the clear and the hardener mixes together. and then you apply the clear. That's what's going to give you that really durable finish of the 2K clear coat versus like a 1K clear coat that just sort of dries naturally like paint. I ended up using 3 cans of clear to cover this. 2 cans to cover the engine bay in one shot. Then I let that dry for about 25 minutes, and then I came back with a 3rd can and did a 2nd coat on all of the areas that I wanted to be super glossy. Again, that's like the strut towers, the radiator core support, and the top of the firewall. I'm really happy with the results. In all, this probably only took me about 5 or 6 hours of work to get done, and having a freshly painted engine bay when you put your engine swap back in just makes so much difference in the overall appearance. So the paint's been drying for almost a day now, so it's cured enough that I can sort of touch it and begin to do some assembly. But I'm probably going to wait at least another 24 to 48 hours before I begin assembling the engine back into the car. I did receive the Hossport engine mount kit, but on our next episode, I'm going to show you some changes that I'm actually going to be making to that kit to improve the ground clearance on the B16 in my CRX. So once again, thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments if there's anything you think that I missed or any details you want me to cover again as far as painting the engine bay. But with that said, I'll see you guys on the next episode.